So my name's Nathan Garner. I'm the Technical Pre-Sales and Project Manager here at Dynamic CCTV. Today we're just going to be taking a quick look over the TVI range. So this will be including the Accusense range using Accusense 2.0, as well as the POC technology, and also covering some of the AOC functionality as well, and just how you can use different technologies. Some of them are now combined, such as the AOC and the Accusense technology. We're just going to have an overview of them all with a couple of slides, and then I've got two of our units set up that we'll log into and go through some of the settings and some of the configuration for the Accusense side of things, especially with the new Motion 2.0 as well. It's included in those DVRs. If you have any questions, if you put them in the Q&A section. If they're on the current slide that I'm on, I will try and answer those on that slide, but I will get to everything towards the end of the webinar. We'll have a full Q&A session, and if you want, you can also email any questions that you have, and my contact details are on screen there as well. So we'll get started now. So the benefits of the TVI range is you don't need to replace the cabling from legacy systems. They're based on the analog technology using either coaxial cable or when you're using Cat5 with balance. If you're using balance, you would need to replace them for TVI balance or POC friendly and AOC friendly, depending on the system that you are using. But a lot of the times you can use the existing cable on site as long as it's high enough quality and to actually handle the TVI transmission. A lot of old systems do use subpar quality cabling, whereas others don't. So it depends on the scenario that you're using it, and also the cable runs that you're needing to achieve. Obviously, the high quality cable that you use, the greater distances that you can achieve with TVI transmission. And with POC, that's limited up to 200 meters from your DVR to your camera point for your cable runs for those. You can also generally achieve longer cable distances with standard TVI cameras, with some in the range on the low resolutions achieving up to 700 meter cabling distances. You do also have the ability for PEZ control. So with older legacy analog systems, you did used to have to run separate telemetry cable between your control device or your DVR or your keyboard to the actual PEZs. With the TVI technology from Hikvision, they use UTC protocol and Hikvision Zone, which is Hikvision C, for coaxial transmission. So instead of having to run your own telemetry cable, it'll actually send the telemetry down the same coaxial cable, or Cat5 if you're using balance, down the same cable as the actual video signal. So it does save on that extra cabling infrastructure needed for legacy systems on there as well. And you can use TVI balance, so if you do have existing Cat5 installed or you prefer using Cat5, you can use the TVI balance. There's also now POC friendly balance that we do now sell, which will allow you to use POC transmission with power and video going over your Cat5 cables. Now in some scenarios, when using standard balance and also sending power down the same Cat5 cable, depending on the cable distances, you can see interference from the actual power supply, especially at night when the cameras are drawing more power than they would normally. So generally on longer cable runs or when you're using high power cameras, it's better to use a powered balance rather than your standard 2-core balance. And with the actual powered balance, they do use a full Cat5 per camera, but they do balance the power and the video signals, so you don't get the interference as you would with standard 2-core balance and running the power down the same Cat5 as well. So it does prevent that from happening. And with the TVI recorders, they're more of a hybrid now, so you can actually add in IP cameras to all the current range of TVI recorders. So if you do need the addition to have a network camera at a different location on site, you can run the cables directly back to the TVI recorder. An additional IP camera can be the solution there. And also if you're having a mixture of systems where you've already got part of the site wired for analog systems, which are being replaced with TVI, but then on the newer side of the site, you're actually installing all new IP solution. You can mix the two technologies together with the TVI recorders. So you could have, for instance, on some of the 7216HU-HI units, you can have 16 TVI cameras and 16 IP cameras on one unit. And that's with the enhanced VCA mode enabled on the system as well. So that gives you the ability to add on more cameras, I should say more IP cameras than you would as standard with those. So with the TVI cameras, I know a lot of the times we do get asked about the different name conventions for the models with the cameras. So I have put this slide in, which will be on the PDF that I send out after the webinar, just to make it easier to differentiate between the different models. So whether or not it's a POC camera, for example, if it's 4-in-1. So a lot of the TVI cameras now, they can give you a CVI output, TVI, analog, and AHD output from the cameras using the toggle switch that comes on the fly lead, so you can use it on different systems. Or if you have an existing analog recorder and you just need to replace one of the cameras, not going for a full system refit, you could actually just set it to output analog from the camera, so it'll actually still work on that existing recorder. You don't need to swap out the full system within that as well. There's now also the newer 4K range of TVI cameras. So it used to be where in order to be able to achieve 4K resolution, you would have to go for an IP MVR with an IP camera, whereas now there is a range of 4K cameras available for the TVI recorders. So you can see the differences between the images, and you generally see the most benefit of a 4K image when you're digitally zooming. So you can see on these license plates, the image has been digitally zoomed. So on the 1080p image, the digital zoom part of that is really blurry, but then when you move up to the 4K, the license plate is nice and clear from the image, and that's been digitally zoomed on there as well. Now there's also the Colorview range. Now this originally came out for the IP systems, but it has also been implemented on the TVI solutions. So you can get a full colour image nighttime and daytime using the new TVI Colorview cameras. There's now also a range that actually include POC as well. So you don't actually have to run a separate PSU for the Colorview cameras that can be powered from the actual DVR that they're connected to. And these are using f1 stop aperture, so it gets in all that light that's needed in order to be able to generate a colour image, even in low light scenarios. And they do also have a warm white LED to boost the light in the area if there isn't enough ambient light for it to stay in colour mode. So you can see on the bullet cameras, you do have the warm white light LED, which can be used to supplement light in the area. So there's no IRs on the camera, it is just white light with the Colorview cameras, and they have more advanced lens, which is f1 stop aperture, which lets in all that ambient light and allows you to have the full color image even at night time with the actual cameras themselves. In some scenarios, you don't actually need to use the white light LED if there's enough ambient light in the area, but in a lot of scenarios it is generally better to have the white light enabled, and it gives you the best image that you can actually achieve with the system in there as well. So with the recorders, they actually have now brought out the POC range, which was a couple of years ago now when it was originally released, but this allows you to be able to power the TVI POC cameras from the actual DVR itself, similar to how it works with IP systems. When you're powering cameras via PoE, you can actually power POC cameras using the POC DVRs, and it's all sent down one coaxial cable from the recorder to the camera itself. Now these can actually be used with balance as well over Cat5. You do have to ensure that the balance that you are using are POC friendly and do support the power transmission over the Cat5 with those which are available from us as well. And this makes it a lot easier when it comes to installation, so you're not having to run power cables to the cameras, just a single coaxial cable from the recorder to the camera or Cat5 if using balance, so you're not having to mess around with any PSUs or anything like that with the systems. So it does make it a lot easier and a lot simpler for installation with those. Now Hikvision have actually combined both the Colorview cameras with the POC technology, so you can actually now buy POC cameras with the Colorview technology built in, so you can actually power the camera from the POC DVR, which can achieve up to 200 meters on RG59 cable between the recorder and the camera, and you still get the benefits of the full color images even in the night time, and that will also supply the power to the Colorview LED white light on the actual camera itself. So there is that benefit now there as well. So this is just a comparison between a standard camera that's using IR technology to give you a nighttime image. So you can see the license plate gets whited out by the IR due to glare back, and also you can't see any details in the image, so what colour clothes the person's wearing, what colour vehicle it is or anything like that, you can't see with the conventional IR technology. Whereas with the Colorview cameras, you can see that it is a red car, you can actually read the license plate, and you can actually see what colour clothes the person's wearing. So this gives you the benefit of, for example, if a car's broken into, you'd be able to see what clothes the person was seen wearing, and additional features like that with the system. So it does give you that additional power with the actual playback of the system to be able to see in colour even at night from the Colorview cameras now. There's just a couple more comparisons, so you can see the standard IR camera, and then you've also got the Colorview image there, which is using the ambient lighting from the area, and that hasn't been supplemented by the LED light. And the same in the bottom scenario, so you can see the two differences between the standard cameras using IR technology and the newer Colorview range of cameras from those. Now we're coming on to the AOC, which is audio over coax. So a lot more systems now, people want to be able to record audio or hear live audio from where the cameras are mounted. Originally with TVI systems, you used to have to run a separate microphone that would have to be wired into the audio input on the back of the recorder. So a separate cable, separate microphone, and you'd also have to use power supply to power that microphone as well. Hikvision have brought out the new TVI recorders which have audio built in, and there's also the new IDS Accusense units which actually combine the AOC technology as well as the Accusense alarm filtering as well. So this allows you to have a single coaxial cable or Cat5 with balance, and you can actually have a built-in microphone in the camera, and that audio would be transmitted down the coaxial cable with the video signal. These do need a power supply for the cameras, so that it's not AOC with POC. You do still need to power the cameras with a separate PSU, but this gives you the benefit of having a built-in microphone in the camera itself and not having to run a separate power supply and a separate audio cable for the actual microphone. And with this, you can then use the system to just hear the live audio from the cameras with built-in microphones, or you can actually record the audio as well to the video stream that's recorded on the DVR itself. Depending on how it needs to be used in the scenario, you can mix and match depending on what's needed for the actual system itself for those. When using the audio over coax solution, the maximum distance that you can achieve using this is 300 meters. So this is from the DVR itself to the camera with the AOC transmission. Above that, you can still get video transmission, but you wouldn't be able to get the audio signal over 300 meters away from the recorder. So there is that limitation to bear in mind with the system. So now we're coming on to the Accusense side of things. So with standard VCA rules, I'm sure we all know that line crossing intrusion detection can be triggered by spiders crossing over the camera lens, bushes moving into the area, or even, for example, a bag has blown into the intrusion zone and it's stayed in that intrusion zone for the threshold time that's been set, and then it's actually triggered that event as a false alarm, and that does cause excessive recording on event-based scenarios depending on how the system's set up, as well as notifications through monitoring stations and the HitConnect mobile app, for example. It's also even worse when you're using standard motion detection. So if any pixel changes on screen, that can actually trigger the motion detection on the system itself. So you do get a lot of false alarms from the standard VCA rules and the standard motion detection on the system. But now with the new Accusense range of TVI DVRs, which start with an IDS instead of a DS, this now has the Accusense alarm filtering technology. So you can actually set it to be the human or vehicle target classification. So this helps to reduce false alarms from the system itself. So when it detects an object in the screen, it's running analytics in the background to see whether or not that's a human and or a vehicle, and it will work up to 70 to 80% accuracy of filtering out those false alarms such as trees, bushes and everything else that can actually falsely trigger the system itself. There's also now the new Motion 2.0, which allows you to do this on motion detection as well. It has a slightly different setup. So instead of clicking and dragging to draw your area, it's set up more like intrusion detection, where you click the different points to set up your zone, or you can set it up on the full screen, which we're going to take a look at on our IDS unit in a moment as well. So within the Accusense DVRs, as standard with a standard recorder, you'd have your hard drive, your CPU on your board. With the Accusense DVRs, you now get an additional GPU, which is dedicated for running the algorithms for the Accusense alarm filtering in the system. So there is the addition of the GPU in the recorder, and this is what's actually running the analytics for the system for your human and vehicle intrusion and line crossing detection filtering, as well as the Motion 2.0 alarm filtering as well. So a normal DVR doesn't have the GPU, whereas the Accusense recorders do have that additional GPU to run the actual analytics for the system itself. Now with Motion 2.0, you can draw your areas on where you want to be able to detect motion within the camera image, or you can actually set it to be full screen detection. And this can then be set to filter out, so it will only trigger off humans and or vehicles. So if it was in a car park, a pedestrian area for example, and you only want to know when a vehicle entered that area, you can set the motion detection to vehicle, and then if a vehicle enters that area, it would then trigger the event or trigger the recording, depending on how the system is actually set up, which we're going to take a look at now if I switch my screens over. So you can see this is the 7208HU-HIK2 recorder, and it's got the /P at the end of the model number, and that means that it is a POC unit. So this is actually powering the camera direct from the back of the unit itself over coax cable. So if we go into our image settings, just see this. So this is the image from the camera itself. It is actually a Colorview camera that I've got connected, that's being powered by a PLC on the actual system itself. If we go into our event section and go into motion, you can see this is our standard motion detection screen for standard TVI recorders and a lot of the standard IP systems as well. So this is our detection area. Now what we'd normally do, we were setting up a specific area where we wanted to trigger motion, we'd click on draw area and just drag our motion detection area on there. Just enable this on here and save that. That's how we'd normally set up standard intrusion detection, which when I switch over to our Accusense recorder, you can see it's a little bit different for the setup, and there is options for the human and or vehicle, which we don't have on this unit, because it's just a standard TVI POC machine, just with the benefit of powering the cameras and also the Colorview technology in the camera itself. So we can go in here and we can just set the audible warning to trigger. With the TVI recorders, you can actually have the images events uploaded to the cloud, such as OneDrive and Google Drive. Generally, the best way to do it is using the cloud box from Hikvision or the VideoLoft solution, which is more designed to be handling CCTV footage uploading to those servers. with third-party services such as OneDrive and Google Drive. They're not designed to be having CCTV images uploading regularly, and there's also additional costs to that as well. So generally we do recommend either using VideoLoft or the new Hikvision solution with the cloud box, using Hike Pro Connect for cloud backups, which will only be done on event storage for the actual system. So if an event's triggered, that can be uploaded to your cloud system there as well. So if we go over to our IDS unit, but first just want to cover something that I've been asked a few times when it comes to TVI systems, is when you're needing to be able to edit these settings in the camera's OSD menu. So you can hear one of the recorders is just triggering there on standard motion detection with the light flickering on the actual screen, so that can trigger it as well. But if I switch this up to a single channel, what we can do, even if we were remote into this recorder, so not on the same network, we can actually access the local menus on the camera itself. So we can click on that little menu icon there, and you can see it's actually brought up the OSD menu for the camera itself. As standard, if for example using a 5 megapixel camera, as standard they do come out of the box at 4 megapixel, so you do have to change the resolutions manually in there. So we can up that or we can drop down depending on the camera that we've got. So if for example we were using a 𝐂𝐸𝐸𝐻 recorder, we could actually set this down to 2 megapixel. Even though it's a 5 megapixel camera, we can drop the resolution to match that's what's needed on the actual camera itself. And we've also got our different video settings in here, and we've got our smart light, which if we click on Iris Plus, we can set the different thresholds for the smart white light, which is your white light LED on the camera itself, to trigger depending on the light levels that are in the area. So you can actually adjust that depending on what's needed, and you can turn it off as well. If you know there's enough white light in the area, or ambient light should I say, you can actually turn off the white light supplement on the camera itself, so it will never use the white light LED. But again, it depends on the scenario that the system's being used in, whether or not you can actually do that without the white light in there. Go down to save and exit. But as long as you can actually access the web front end of the camera itself, so you can see that's just rebooted there, and it's now come back at the 1080p, which is the 2 megapixel resolution. You can see there's a lot more blur in the image there. It's not as sharp in the actual image, but I've just dropped that resolution there. And as long as you can actually access the web front end of the recorder, you can actually do this remotely. You don't need to be on site to actually access the menus of the camera itself using that OSD menu command with the PEZ control and the web front end. So if we move over to our Accusense recorder, which is denoted by the IDS at the beginning of the model number, and at the end of it we've got the 4S. So this means that this recorder can do 4 channels of the alarm filtering on intrusion detection and line crossing. So you can't do it across all 8 channels on the unit. It is only 4 channels that you can actually enable with the advanced analytics for the false alarm filtering on the system itself. And so there is that to note there as well. There is that limitation with the units. What you can also do with the IDS range is in the firmware you can actually use a USB Wi-Fi dongle. So if you need to connect the unit to Wi-Fi, you can't get an Ethernet cable from the recorder to the network, but you do have Wi-Fi signal. You can actually use a USB Wi-Fi dongle and actually connect the unit to the Wi-Fi that's on site. So depending on the scenario, you can actually use a Wi-Fi dongle, and we do have a list of Wi-Fi dongles that are compatible with the system, which we can send out as well. Oh, there, just log back in. So they are flexible with that, and the Wi-Fi dongles are only compatible with the IDS Accusense TVI recorders, and they do need to be on a specific firmware as well. It's above 4.26 and above will have the Wi-Fi dongle functionality with those. So what we can do is, if we go into our event section, and if we first take a look at the motion detection page on here, so you can see we've got additional options within this area. So on the right hand side, we've got our target classification options. So we can set this to only detect on humans and or vehicles, depending on what we're needing to meet the requirements for the site. We can change those options. And if we go to draw area, instead of clicking and dragging for the area itself, it's a lot more like the intrusion detection zones now. So we actually have to click at the different points that we want our motion detection area to be. Dynamic analysis. So that's saved. And then you can see there, if we were wanting to send an email when the motion 2.0 is triggered, we'd need to enter in the SMTP details for the site in the network settings for the recorder. The Notify Surveillance Center option, this is if you want to send the events through to the HyConnect app, for example, or to the IVMS 4200 software for PC, or to Hike Central, which is the licensed VMS software that's also available as well. So depending on what kind of event you want to trigger from the recorder, depends on the linkage method that you'd set in the actual unit itself for those. So that's the motion 2.0. So you can see it's mapping me there on the left hand side, but it hasn't actually turned red because I haven't walked into the area for that to trigger. But if I go into our local, and we've got our rules enabled there, I've got live view, switch this to a single view, there. If I walk it into the zone, you should be able to hear the audible warning trigger within the actual system there. So the actual audible warning was triggered on the system there from the actual event itself. Now if we go back into our configuration page and then go into our event section, now if we then go into our smart events, this is where you can configure your line crossing and your intrusion detection. And you can also, because this is an AOC recorder as well with the IDS range, you can actually use AOC cameras on these units. You can actually set up events for your audio. So if there's sudden loss of audio or an increase in sound in the area, you can actually have that trigger an alarm or an event on the system itself. So you can have those warnings come through. By going to our intrusion detection, you can see we've got options for our minimum and maximum sizes. So the maximum size is the maximum size of an object that would need to be detected in the area. So this gives you additional accuracy with the system. So if an object's above that size, it won't trigger the system itself. So if we were setting up this for humans, the biggest we'd appear on screens about there, and the minimum size, we can set that to be approximately there. Once the minimum maximum size is set, you can then draw the area. So if we just draw the area over our doorway and set that there. The threshold is the time in seconds that a person or vehicle would need to be in that intrusion zone in order for the event to actually trigger on the system. So you can set that anything from 0 all the way up to 2 seconds on the Accusense recorders. So we've set that to 1 second, and we can set the target detection to human on the system as well. And we can save that on there. Now if we go into our line crossing, so instead of an intrusion zone, we actually have a line similar to the standard VCA rules. that we're all used to. So we can draw the line crossing detection there. If we set our maximum size and just set our minimum, enable at the top, and then we can set this one to only trigger off vehicle. So if you have a car park, for example, or an area where pedestrians, where it's pedestrian only, you can set a line crossing to only trigger off vehicles. So if humans walk through that line crossing zone, it's not actually going to trigger the event until a vehicle drives through that area. On there, we can save that. So the setup is slightly different. You do need to make sure the minimum and maximum zones are configured in order to be able to get the most accurate readings from the system. The best way to be able to do it, for example, your minimum size, it's best to either walk test it, or if you're using a vehicle, you'd use a vehicle to be able to do this, but you'd park the vehicle or the human at the furthest distance that you need to be able to, that would be triggering the event. Draw your minimum box size of that person or vehicle, and then you'd then have a person stand as close, or a vehicle as close to the camera itself on the actual image, and then you draw the maximum size to be that size on screen, and that gives you the most accurate detections with the system with the minimum and maximum zones. And I found that's generally the best way to be able to set them up with those, and you know that they're going to be the most accurate settings, and you can then walk test the system to make sure it's triggering as expected on the units themselves on there. So that's just a quick overview of the TVI range with the new Accusense, the Colorview and POC, and also the AOC technology. So there is a lot of benefits with the TVI systems, and they do have a lot of the more the advanced functions that did only used to be available with IP systems. So there is a lot more technology there now than there were in the early days with TVI. So just a quick note that for our technical support staff, we do have 10 members in our technical support team that wait and take your call on our office number, which you can see at the bottom, which is option 2 for technical support. We don't have a queuing or ticketing system, so when you do ring our line, there will be someone there that will be able to answer the call and assist you with your queries or any issues that you are having on site. And as ever, follow us on our social media pages for the latest updates, and we do also have a technical news bulletin that goes out, and these links will be clickable on the PDFs that I'll send out after this webinar as well. So if you have any questions, if you go to the Q&A section on the webinar and put in any questions that you have, and I'll work through those now, or you can email me, and my contact details are on screen there with any questions that you have from today. But thank you for joining me. When the webinar closes, there will be a short survey feedback form. I'd be very grateful if you could give us any feedback on the webinar, good or bad. It does help us to improve our webinars for our customers and make them as best as we can for our clients. But if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in there. Dean is asking, send me a list of supported Wi-Fi dongles for the IGS DVRs. Yes, so I'll send out a list of the supported Wi-Fi dongles, Dean. I'll add it onto the email that I send out with the slides from the webinar for those. Mark has asked if POC with AOC is in the pipeline at all. There isn't at the moment with POC and AOC, but I will mention that in our next meetings with R&D to be able to bring that feature in hopefully at a later date with those. And Chris has asked about Accusense and POC combined DVR. So I have actually recently asked China regarding this, because quite a few of our customers have asked for this functionality to be able to have the power of the POC recorder with the Accusense alarm filtering, but there is nothing planned unfortunately at the moment. But the more people that are asked for it, Hikvision do always listen to customers, and they do try and add those in. So I will mention that again to them, Chris. Anonymous has asked, did one of the slides mention that you carry out free port forwarding on all DVRs purchased from yourselves? So yes, we do offer a free port forwarding service for all recorders that purchase directly from ourselves, which can be arranged with our technical support team. As long as there isn't any managed IT on site, we can manually port forward the router for those. I will explain a bit more how fault find, etc. please. So Paul has asked, are you able to explain a bit more on how POC works and what can be done for fault finding, etc. please? So in the actual menu on the recorder itself, if you go into camera, there is a POC information page. So generally what we'll find is there'll be the camera's not powering up, or you're not getting a video signal from the camera itself. If you go into the POC information page on the MVR, or DVR should I say, it will actually tell you if the camera is drawing POC power from the recorder. Now there can be a number of issues that cause with the POC, so if the balance, for example, aren't POC friendly, or if the cable distance is too long, or there's poor coax cable that's being used, or there could just be a damaged cable somewhere on the actual system itself which is causing the issue. But the general rule of thumb is to go into the actual recorder itself, see if it's drawing POC power. If it is, then it could be just an issue with the poor signal coming from the video from the actual camera itself, or it could be that it's going over too long of a distance between the recorder and the camera on site for those. Tim has asked, can we add our logo to the no video screen yet? There is an option to have customized firmwares created to be able to add in your company logos on the no video screens, but there is a charge to be able to do this in order to be able to have your logo on instead of displaying no video for the camera images there. Justin has asked, on event recording, can the time of the recording be increased? So in the record settings for the recorder, if you go into your schedules and then go into advanced, there's an option to set your pre and post record times. So you can actually up those times to the pre and post event recording to increase those lengths depending on what's needed for the site there. Anonymous has asked, will the 𝐂𝐸𝐸𝐸 range be released in a POC format along with the matching 8 megapixel cameras for the units? So there isn't anything in the pipeline yet, but it is something that has been asked for quite a lot, and I'm sure Hikvision will be releasing those to generally up the resolutions that's supported by POC as we go further down the line. But I'll check on that and I will let you know there. With POC, can you connect a power unit at the control end, or must you use POC DVR? So with the POC recorders, there is a secondary device that can deliver POC instead of the recorder. It's available as a special order unit, which I can email you over details about that, Mark. There is a separate device that can deliver POC to the cameras rather than the DVR, depending on the scenario that's needed. But I'll send over some more information on that for you. And I think that's all the questions that I've got through there. If you have any other questions though, please feel free to get in touch. My contact details are on screen there. And when the webinar closes, if you could fill out the feedback form, I'd really appreciate it. And it'll help be able to prepare better webinars going forward for yourselves, our customers. But thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you on the next webinar next week, which is covering the ANPR technology from standalone ANPR cameras all the way through to larger systems using the Hikvision platform. Thank you. Bye.